Hi, so today we're going to look at round 11 of the Candidates Tournament. I'm like 2 days behind, so we're going to try to do a really quick recap today. So Anand beat Karyakin, and Spidler beat Aronian with black, which was interesting. Giri made his 11th straight draw with Nakamura, and Topalov and Caruana also drew. So we're going to go through this really quickly, because I still have to make the recap for round 12 before I get tired and want to go to sleep. So we're going to keep it to 3 games today in the interest of keeping it short. Giri Nakamura was definitely interesting in its own ways, but I thought that was somehow the least intriguing of the four, in that it wasn't a decisive result, and also that I didn't find it quite as entertaining as the Topalov Caruana game. But anyways, let's get started with the Anand Karyakin game, let's say. So yeah, as mentioned, Anand beat Karyakin, and this game was sort of a reversal of the Karyakin Anand game from earlier in the tournament, where in that game Karyakin had white. He reached a sort of equalish, slightly better position and ground Anand down. In this game, the opposite of that happened. Anand had white, slightly better equalish position, and Karyakin got ground down. So this was a game in which they reached this position, which is an opposite color bishop with rook endings, where white's slightly better, and Anand took 40 moves of sort of moving around in circles and eventually ground his way to a victory. It was a really subtle technical display, which I could um, probably delve into for like an hour at least, and it would probably be pretty instructive. But again, this is a highlight show, and that's not particularly interesting um, for the casual spectator. But anyways, we're gonna look at this quickly. This was probably the first moment Karyakin could have improved. He could have played f5, which is important because he went rook c8 instead, allowing white to play f5 himself. And then after bishop d7, the important move h4. The first point is that if this guy's taken, then bishop f4 can happen, and this passed pawn on c7 gets covered. So not only has he sort of induced a weakness on the king's side, but he's also managed to keep this pawn, which is going to keep some piece of black tied down for the foreseeable future. Um, and as well, if this guy's taken right away, which is possible, then white can take this guy on c5. So he can argue that he hasn't lost his c7 pawn for nothing, which it looked like he might for a little bit. So he's won a pawn on the king's side in exchange for it, and also he's made some headway on the king's side. Um, Instead, g6 was played. And importantly, after all these guys were exchanged on the king's side, it's impossible to take on f5, because if black could take on f5 and liquidate the group of pawns on the king's side, he would draw no problem. But the problem is white's threatening to play bishop f4 or bishop d8, with the point that rook's being attacked, and if the rook moves, the guy on d7 hangs, and white wins a piece. So white's able to establish this passed pawn on f6, which is important. Because he's going to try to slowly, methodically make progress on both sides of the board. He's going to stretch black out to cover the guys on the queen side, and as well keep white's passed pawn in check, all the while bringing this king up. And eventually, white is able to break through. So let's fast forward a second. He's managed to, by this point, exchange off his c4 pawn for the b7 pawn, which is an extremely favorable exchange for white. Because the c4 pawn was really doing nothing. It was a doubled pawn that wasn't going anywhere. He's exchanged that for the pawn on b7, which was the base pawn of 2 pawn chains. It was covering both of these guys. So now both of these guys are much more likely to be captured. Not necessarily that white's going to win them, although that is definitely a scenario that black's got to avoid, like white taking this pawn somehow with his rook and then queening this guy. But black's got to waste valuable resources covering these pieces, or pawns rather. Pawns are pieces too. And so yeah, white just brings his king up. He tries to stretch black out between the two weaknesses. And eventually, he manages to lure black's king over to the queen side. One important point here is that if white captures this pawn, black can play king b7. And white's rook is stranded over here. Black can't win it, but his rook is stranded. So he's definitely not going to win anymore, because his rook is going to be stuck there forever. But yeah, this is sort of a demonstration of black's king is kind of stuck over here, where if there were no problems on the queen side, the black king would just stay on the king side forever, and white would never be able to force this pawn through. Fast forwarding to this point, the king was so far over on the queen side that white was definitely able to just play rook e7 and be winning for sure. Because if you exchange these guys, White's going to use this king to support the pawn, and it's obviously going to go through. Whereas the scenario is much the same if you move the rook away. King g6 and king g7, f7, f8. And Black's going to have to give up something huge to stop this pawn. So that was a really nice technical display by Anand. It's a shame that there's not really time to go through it in more detail. But if you are interested, I strongly advise to look at it yourself, because I can only assume that it'll do good things for your endgame technique to watch the technique of a world-class player. Okay, so Aronian Svidler. Svidler played his new pet line of the Slav, I guess, again, and he managed to beat Aronian with black, which was pretty good considering Aronian was contending for first and Svidler was not doing that at the time. And also because it was a win with black, which hasn't occurred very much in this tournament, or at top level in general, but I don't know, is that the first black win of the tournament? I'll have to check that. Anyways, the game started getting interesting around here. Move 32, Svidler played rook a c8, rather than playing b6 or something to cover this guy. He played rook a c8, and stuff started getting interesting. Aronian took on b7, and rook b8 was played. Now, what's important to note here is that White's king is not especially safe. Black's king is potentially not all that safe either. Like, if White finds a convenient moment to sacrifice a rook on g6, which could potentially happen, then Black's king might prove to be the less safe of the two kings. But at the moment, this rook being on g3 rather than covering the back rank could be a problem, as well as the fact that f4 is in. We'll see both of these working against White later, because anything along here is probably going to be check, which is an issue. And yeah, this rook, if it's not going to sacrifice itself on g6, is generally just poorly placed on g3. And there's even some lines where Black is able to play h4 with tempo and then play h3 to disturb White's kingside solidity. Anyways, so taking on a7 is the obvious move, but you really can't do that. Well, you can, but it's really risky, because again, rook b1 check happens, and then rook b2 check. Now, if you go back to the back rank, you have to acquiesce to at least a draw, probably, because you'll just get checked back and forth. Although, presumably, Black does have more. Like, he can play something like queen a3, threatening mate and stuff. He can bring this rook into play. Maybe not queen e3, like rook hb8 or something. Anyways, taking that pawn, and if you come forward, then I mean, that's not especially safe. Like, for example, you have to put your rook on g4. If you put it on h3, then already queen c6 is a huge problem, because you can't cover this guy on g2. But yeah, you have to play rook g4, which is an awkward square for the rook, and Black can play h3. And if this guy moves, then h2 falls, rather. Okay, so all that to say that it's really risky to take on a7, and Aronian played definitely the correct decision to just bring the queen back. And rook hc8 was played, activating the other rook. Now, Aronian went rook b5. Maybe it's better to play just h3, just to give this king a hole to hide out on h2 in case any nonsense happens. Aronian never actually got around to doing that, and it kind of ended up costing him, because when he was later checked on the back rank, the king had to come forth to f2 rather than having a safe sort of hidey hole on h2. So maybe that was a good time to throw in that move. Instead, he played rook b5, which does sort of counteract the action along the b file, but it does allow Black to play queen h3. So now the guy on c3 is attacked, and stuff on the back rank is potentially going to happen. So queen c2 was played here. There's a chance to play rook takes g6, and the point is that after f takes g6, you can play queen b7 and win the rook back. But with both kings as exposed as they are in a queens only ending, someone will definitely get perpetual within the next few moves. So that's not really a winning attempt. And Aronian being white and trying to contend for first wasn't really willing to do that, even though objectively it might be the correct decision at this point. Because after queen c2, he's still up a pawn, but he's under quite a bit of pressure. And again, his king is less safe. Black's king is not coming in under any danger at any point soon. White's king is not safe. This rook is misplaced. And yeah, black's got a bunch of pressure. He went rook b8. Yeah, so some problems are illustrated in the line where if you try to play c4, which covers this pawn, and also coincidentally opens a discovered attack on the queen, there's queen a1 check, king f2, then queen takes d4 check, and then you take the f pawn, and white is in a lot of trouble. Considering then he'll be down a pawn as well as all of the problems he had previously. So that's sort of a sample as to why white king isn't very safe. So queen e2 was played instead, which probably isn't that good. But the position is difficult. You probably have to allow the capture on this square to happen. Aronian tried to hold on to all of his stuff and at least try to claim that he was a pawn up for the moment. But queen c1 happened, and this is annoying on account of he went king f2 in the game, and then queen takes f4 check happened. If you block with the queen, well, for one thing, Svidler can at least play queen takes and rook takes b5 and have a rook ending where he's at least equal. Or alternatively, he can play something like queen b2 and try to keep the pressure up. But the point is that, yeah, white's king is not all that safe. He's got an extra pawn, but these guys are well, at least one of them's going to drop off the board at some point, as well as this guy on f4, which did drop off with check. And yeah, black was better now on account of, again, safer king. Material's equal now. He's got better coordinated major pieces, and white's pawns are kind of weak. Like if white can manage to get the c pawn going or something, maybe it's passed. So you could argue that it's a strength in that case. But for the moment, I think it's just weak, and it's going to be really hard to advance the guys without losing them. So here, queen f4, king g1. They repeated for a minute, and then Svidler decided he didn't want to take the draw, which is the correct decision. And queen b2 was played, and then a6, taking advantage of this pin. Then c4 happened, and c takes b5, and he played c5 now, trying to get something with the c pawn. On account of if you take this, rook c8 happens, and this is not going to be very fun. On account of rook c1 is a threat, and you will have to give up your queen if you allow that to happen. It's too late to play h3 because your rook will hang. And on something like rook f3, then rook c1 check, king f2, like queen h4 check, rook g3, and then rook d1. And it doesn't look like this should be all that bad for white, but the computer's telling me it's like -3, which is a huge problem. A bunch of these pawns are going to drop off. This guy's passed, but it's probably going to fall. Again, because the reason why it's a weakness rather than a strength, it's because black's major pieces are so much better coordinated than white's. So that pawn's not really that worrying. And yeah, this guy's going to fall. White still has to answer to mate threats, and black is winning. So again, these are just sample variations to demonstrate just how bad white's position can get. c5 was played, although it's probably, at this point, even too late to try to salvage this. Queen e4, queen d2, which is a final mistake. You can try h3 or something, but again, the game is sort of already lost. It's a pawn down as well as the stuff that we mentioned. So queen d2 is a mistake, which was capitalized on after queen b1 check, king f2, rook a8. And the problem is rook a2 is a threat, and it's extremely difficult to meet this, actually, on account of, yeah, your pieces are just too not well placed to deal with this. For example, like if you play queen e1 to get out of it this way, probably the best thing to do is to just play queen b2 check. And then, like, if you block this way, if you go back to the back rank, then you get pinned with rook a1. If you block this way, this pawn hangs with check, and then this pawn is likely to hang as well. And then it's going to be 3 pawns, and then white is definitely lost. So, yeah, following queen e1 and queen b2, Aronian resigned. So that was a nice game by Svidler. Not one that Aronian should be particularly happy about losing. So Topalov Caruana was pretty fun. I'm just going to sort of show this game really quickly, because it was one of the draws. It wasn't one of the decisive results, so it's not one of the games everyone cares about. It was pretty interesting, but in addition, I don't understand most of what happened, so I'm hard-pressed to explain what happened and quite honestly, I don't have the time right now to delve properly into it to figure out what was going on. So anyways, out of the opening, Topalov sacrificed an exchange for a pawn, as well as a huge lead in development, on account of all of Black's pieces are on the back rank, besides his queen and rook, both of which are misplaced. So this looked really pleasant for White, although Caruana did defend quite accurately and managed to reach a position that looked like this, in which, yeah, Topalov obtained the bishop pair. The material balance is still roughly the same. Topalov's got the bishop pair now, but other than that, he hasn't managed to prove all that much in compensation for his invested material. For example, Black's kings managed to get to safety. Black's got most of his pieces in the game. The only guy not participating currently is his rook, which he then activated with h5. And Topalov was sort of obligated, sort of quasi-obligated, due to the sort of passive location of his queen, to go for this kind of ending. Now, arguably, it was more accurate to play h5, for the sort of subtle reason that after here, takes, that Black's bishop is on g5 rather than f6, and it's slightly worse placed on g5 than f6 on account of it doesn't hit the b2 pawn in some strange lines where the rook comes down, somehow takes this guy and takes this guy with the bishop on f6. That was arguably more accurate of a way to play, but anyways, I'm still not entirely clear on that. I looked at that for about 5 minutes and I'm profoundly confused. But anyways, bishop g2 was played, and they reached this sort of ending where it was an exchange down for White, but White had no clear weaknesses, and it's not all that easy to make progress with Black. The computer's spouting a bunch of lines that says Black's winning, but in practice it's not all that easy to convert, evidently. White's one sore point should be the f2 pawn, but he's got that pretty adequately covered at the moment. Like, it's being attacked once, being defended another time. This rook can never really attack this guy with this bishop sitting on d3. Like, you can't make it to the f5 square, the bishop's covering that. You can't make it to the f1 square, the bishop's covering that. This bishop can never really attack it because it's got its two bodyguards over here. Which is interesting. This concept's kind of cool in that this pawn is covering these two guys, and these two guys are kind of covering this pawn on account of they're providing diagonal shields from the dark square bishop, which is kind of cool. Anyways, Caruana didn't manage to win this, although you could argue that he should have. E4 was played, which perhaps wasn't necessary. Now there's a chance to play bishop c5 and attack the guy on f2 again. But after e5, if you capture on f2, let's say you capture this way, then White can play rook takes f2. Of course, and the guy on c1 is hanging. You've got to get your rook out of there first, and then White played rook c2, and this pawn is still not able to be captured, because if you take with the bishop, then you get mated, of course. And if you take with the rook, then there's rook takes c5, with the point that if this guy is captured, then b6 happens, and this pawn, you can't really stop it. So you're forced to play c4, b7, cd3, b8 queen, king h7, and then White's got a queen now, and White's the one trying to win. So that's kind of cool how that f2 pawn is always indirectly defended. So g5 was tried instead, which is maybe not the best. But yeah, it's not all that easy to win this position anyways. Like, it's even possible maybe to just sacrifice the exchange on c5, even if your b-pawn won't, like, queen unstoppably, and just say, I've got everything defended, how are you going to win? So it's not all that easy. g5 was played, and in a couple moves, the game was agreed to draw, because Caruana just gave up on trying to win this. And White managed to establish a really weird kind of fortress there. Admittedly, again, I haven't looked at this deeply enough to say for sure whether Black should be definitively winning at any point, but he was definitely the one pressing. Right, so that's going to be it for today's video, and I'll see you soon, because I have to record another one right after this.